Hi everyone, this is Sam Evans and I'm excited to be part of Humans of Telecom.
Hey everyone, a very warm welcome to Humans of Telecom, the Unplugged podcast. This is your host Anurag Aggarwal. This is the place where we dive into the world of telecom, not just the tech and trends, but the people behind it all. The unexpected journeys, the career pivots, the laughs, the lessons, all the stuff you won't find on a LinkedIn profile. Well, and today's guest? He's been featured in the Capacity Power 100 list 2 years in a row. So clearly, he's not just playing the game, he's shaping it. He spent over 15 years working across operators, the GSMA, and advisory firms. He's lived and worked across continents and now calls the Middle East his home. Mainly because, in his own words, it's the perfect hub to get anywhere in the world in one flight. He advises some of the biggest names in international connectivity, supports carriers that keep the world running, and also happens to be the person who brings top telecom leaders together as the facilitator of the ITW Global Leaders Forum. And if you bump into him at a conference, don't be surprised if he starts passionately explaining why subsea cables are the most exciting thing in telecom. So, let's jump into unfolding the stories of this amazing human being. Please join me in welcoming Sam Evans, Senior Managing Director at FTI Delta. Sam, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this journey. We'd love to hear more about you. Which part of the world do you belong to? And from where are you joining this podcast today?
Anurag, thank you very much. So I'm joining today from Cannes. I'm at Data Cloud World Congress. I've been here this week facilitating the Digital Infra Leaders Forum, which is an offshoot of the GLF, where we brought together private capital executives, data center builders and operators and fiber providers to really talk about where the digital infrastructure industry is going. But your question is of where I'm from. So Dubai is home at the moment. And as I think you said in the intro, you can get anywhere in the world from that. It's the perfect hub. It's also a perfect place for my children to grow up. But if you really ask me, where am I from? South London. Within South London, Crystal Palace. I'm very proud to be the only self-identifying Crystal Palace fan in the world of FTI Delta.
Amazing. So, Sam, we managed to catch you in the middle of your travels as always. I think you are leading the absolute jet setter life of living out of a suitcase. I think for many people it appears glamorous, but I know, having lived that life, that how strenuous it can be. And thank you for finding time within this to do this podcast. So, Sam, let's start by understanding your journey. The man from South London who's now based out of Dubai. How has that entire journey been? What have been the highs and the lows? And how did you get into the world of telecom?
So I got into telecoms, I would say, by accident. I knew what telecoms was from a young age. My father was in a mobile phone network, so I was aware of it, right? But actually, I think it started with my love of music, believe it or not. So when I was at university, I like going to see bands perform. And I worked out that if I got into the university radio station, I would be able to get free tickets to see them perform. I'll get to interview them when I went there, and they'd also send me free CDs. So I ended up running a radio station, running a couple of club nights that went off the side of that, because I worked out that if you ran club nights, it was your way to get free drinks. You could control the music and you could bring all your friends for free as well on your uni nights out. And so I got really into this world of media. And so I said to my parents, I said, right, I think I'm going to go off and I'm going to be a radio DJ. And they went, no, you've got to get a proper job. And my brother was in this thing called management consulting, which I hadn't really thought about, but I went and had a look at it. And I found that there was a company, it was called Spectrum Strategy Consultants, that only did media, telecoms, and technology consulting. So I thought, I'll have a go at that. That was actually the only intern application I wrote during my time at uni. I was lucky enough to get the internship. I got offered a job off the back of that, and I never really looked back. And that led me from consulting. I then left that and worked for Virgin Media for some time. I then came back into consulting. I then got a job as the corporate strategy director of GSMA. And I think that was a real inflection point. And from then, the world of telecoms has been home. And I've been deep in it for the last 10 to 12 years and completely passionate about it and how it connects everything to everyone. And it's taken me all over the world.
Interesting, Sam. So I must say you're quite an enterprising personality. I mean, how was the uni days of getting all free tickets and getting your friends in? And did you actually manage to be a DJ at any point of time in this entire journey?
So I've said it, I've left my DJing times behind. They were fantastic times. I was also, before uni, I was in a rock band and I used to play a lot of music. And I keep those as a passion going forwards. But I think what it taught me at that stage in my, well, I call it career, but sort of that stage of my life was, you've got to be enterprising, as you've said, and you've got to find opportunities, and opportunities lead to meeting new people. And when you meet new people, they lead to new opportunities. And as long as you love what you do and you love meeting new people and doing new things, you can just go a really long way.
Absolutely. I totally vibe with that. And I think that brings you into the perfect spot where you are in FTI Delta. And I think this industry is all about people, and all the face to face interactions we have at events. I think that just makes it so amazing. So, Sam, in this journey of yours where you mentioned so many interesting aspects, including being part of a rock band. I think that's what some of our listeners might talk to you about later when they meet you. But in this journey, is there any one specific impactful moment that has shaped your career or anything that you can share with us?
Yes, and when I think about it, and I think about moments, there's always a person behind the moment, right? And if I look back over my life, there are a small handful of people who their interactions have been absolute sort of inflection points for me. And I would not be here having this conversation with you if it wasn't for those people, right? And I think back, for example, when I was at school, I had a phenomenal teacher, Mr. Hall. I was 13. He taught me my ethical compass, but more importantly, he taught me, busy people get more done. And so I hold on to that, right? When I was then at the GSMA, I had a phenomenal boss, a lady called Hyunmi Yang from Korea. And she really took me by her side to meet executives across the industry. I'm in my late 20s at this stage, and I'm in the same room as telecom CEOs, just learning. It was like an MBA that money couldn't buy, right? And then as part of that, I met a gentleman who's still in Telefonica, Julio Linares. And one day he said this phrase to me that's just stuck with me. When things go wrong, everybody tends to look out the window first. Sam, always look in the mirror before you look out the window. And then there's another lady who was ending up being a professional coach for me, a lady called Caroline Goyder, who taught me the concept of gravitas, how to really connect with people. And so I think back that, when you go, what's the most impactful moment that's got you to where you are? It's not a moment, it's these interactions with people who have, it could be a moment or a sentence, or it could be a long period of time. They've sort of mentored and coached me. That's where I am. I'm not here because I'm, anything different to anybody else. I've got to where I am in my career because I've been lucky enough to come across some phenomenal people who shaped that journey.
Wonderful, Sam. Yes, I totally agree that the human impact on all of us is so tremendous. And when we look back, some of these interactions which seem, something not very deep, or you feel that at that point of time they may not have that impact. Like they say, the butterfly effect. You don't know from where to where a simple interaction can get you. So totally get that.
Yeah, 100%. If I just go back, that Julio Linares comment, that was a throwaway line he said to me about 15 years ago. I'm sure he will not remember even that meeting, let alone saying that line, but the impact that line has had that has taken me into how I lead my teams, how I advise clients is just phenomenal. So the butterfly effect in that sense is completely real.
Absolutely. Totally get that. And Sam, now let's move more towards understanding Sam Evans as a person, the human side of Sam. So while we've already discussed so many aspects about you, which are, for me personally, they're quite a revelation that I didn't ever imagine that Sam, who's always the fancy consultant at all our ITW events, also has been part of a rock band. But if there's something more you can tell our listeners today, something that's shocking or unknown about Sam, what would that one thing be?
So you said, Anurag, that people often see me, facilitating a conference, right, or managing a roundtable or advising clients, and I'm confident in that environment. And I put a lot of that down to my training in radio, for example. I can speak to groups, but actually in a personal setting, I find I'm an incredibly shy person. Right. If you put me in a social setting, having to go and say hello to strangers, I would find it incredibly difficult. Yet when I'm Sam, the advisor, and I'm in my comfort zone talking about the topics I love, I just have a very different level of confidence. And so I think that's maybe something people wouldn't realize when they see me around these events or in the industry is, as a person, I'm shy. I try to be incredibly sort of discreet. I'm very private, and it's sort of, I can then, come out a lot more and sort of be much more confident when I'm in these professional settings.
Absolutely. You're not the first person on this show to have mentioned that. There are many on this show who've actually mentioned that they are an introvert. I still remember one of the gentlemen, Vinod Kumar, who's the ex CEO of Tata Communications, and he is amazing on stage. He has phenomenal stage presence. But when I spoke to him on the show, he said, I'm actually an introvert by nature. So, I think that's something which appears as a dichotomy, but I see it very prevalent amongst a lot of us, that we are very different off stage and on stage. And I think we are able to do really well in both settings. So, totally get that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And Sam, while you've shared with us some of the other aspects about music and how you vibe with people, but if there is one thing that I can say that Sam does to recharge himself, or some of your passions or your interests, what is something you can share with us?
I'll put it down to two things, Anurag. It's sweat and music. So sweat, I like running. I run marathons. I don't run marathons particularly fast, but I find that, it's an exercise in not giving up. And I quite enjoy that. It's a chance to, turn the emails off for a couple of hours and go running. So that will be something I do. I thought I could take up amateur boxing at one point. So I got a boxing trainer, started training. I then went to a boxing gym in Bali, thinking that I was actually getting quite good at boxing. I learned within 3 seconds and 5 punches to my rib cage that I was actually not very good at boxing. So I put boxing on the back burner. But I try and exercise 5-6 times a week. And then the second thing is music. And I've got back into music in the last years. And so I bought myself a piano. I bought myself a drum kit, and I spend a lot of time with my daughters. One of my daughters sings really well. The other likes playing the drums, and we pick up some songs. At the moment, they seem to be mainly Taylor Swift songs, if I'm honest. And we'll learn how to play them, and we play them as sort of a mini band at the weekend. And it's a world away from, advising executives and boardrooms and flying all over the place. It's just a really great way to disconnect.
Interesting. So you've managed to keep the legacy of being part of a band still alive. So from a rock band, you're at least in a family band now.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think the family band sounds a lot better than the rock band ever sounded. I might have been in a rock band, but I never said it was any good. But no, we had fun. We had fun.
Awesome. Awesome, Sam. And Sam, now we come to an interesting part where you have to share 3 statements with us. 2 of them have to be truths. One of them has to be a lie. And I have to try and guess which one of them is a lie. And all 3 statements, I would expect that Sam would have some very exotic aspects about his life to share with us. So let's go for it.
Okay, so let me think. Okay, so statement 1: I was on The Weakest Link in the UK, the television program with Anne Robinson. 2: I'm in the middle of training for my first Ironman, which I hope to do next year. And 3: one time I ended up in the canteen, the staff canteen of the US Supreme Court, and I had breakfast with my mum.
Okay. Let me see now. So, being on the weakest link, training for the Iron Man for next year, and ending up into the Supreme Court staff canteen and having lunch with your mum, right?
Yeah.
Um, the third one seems very intriguing, and I'm gonna say that's the truth, and I'm hoping there's some story behind it. So we'd love to hear that. So I'm gonna say that's the truth.
Oh.
Um, you've already mentioned your passion for running. I've also personally seen that, how active you are at the ITW event, that 5 kilometer run that we do over there. And I've seen so many pictures of yours running. So I know you're passionate about that. So I'm going to say Iron Man also. You're training for that. And I wish you all the very best for that. So I'm going to say that's the truth. Would love to know if there is an element of being on the show, The Weakest Link as well. But given the nature of this question, I'm going to say that's a lie. And the second and the third ones are true. So is that correct?
Okay, incorrect. Incorrect. Because I'm not training for my first Ironman. I don't have enough time to really swim for hours and hours on a day. One day maybe I'll do an Ironman, but I was on The Weakest Link in the UK, and I have ended up in the Supreme Court having breakfast with my mum in the staff canteen. So would you like to hear the stories behind some of those, Anurag?
And what are the stories behind it? How was the experience of being on the weakest link? And did you do well in the show? And if I remember correctly, that's the one where you keep getting eliminated. They keep eliminating the weakest link, right? If I get that right. So you have to survive through the game as much as possible. How was that experience?
So it was fascinating. So the reason I went on it was I was at university and I saw a poster up saying, call for auditions, right? And they're touring these cities. So I thought, you know what? And this is a time where I'm really interested in media. I'm running the radio station. I thought, let me go along. And if nothing else, it's an interesting day out. So I went to the audition and I got on really well with the researchers. They're young guys. And they said, look, after you've done the audition, you may or may not get called for a show. But if you do, it'll be in about 6 months. And anyway, 2 weeks later, they phoned me up and said, hey, actually, we've got a show for you. Would you like to come and be on the show? So I'm like, 100%. Because for me, it was a chance to see how a TV show is made, right? I was fascinated by it. Now, you go down there, you go on the set, and what happens on the weakest link is at the end of every round, they go off and they huddle away and with the producer, and then they come back and they do the sort of contestant interaction in the next round. And what was happening was I was strongest link 3 rounds in a row. And obviously that makes for really bad TV. So the next round they came out, and I can't remember the exact questions, but I had something like, what's the 3rd largest lake in Canada? And which 1927 movie did some actor that I've never heard of play a role that I've never heard of? Whilst other people had questions as simple as equivalent to like, what is 1 + 1 is 2? So at the end of that round, I was obviously the weakest link. They voted me out. It made for good television. It also gave my friends at university a good laugh when they put it out on TV. But what it meant was I actually left a little bit early. I got to the contestant buffet a bit earlier. And I got to spend the rest of the day just hanging out with the production crew. And so it was actually a fascinating thing to do, just to see how you build a TV show. So I'm thrilled I did it. I'm still a little bit sore that I felt the program was a bit rigged, but it makes for good TV. So it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
And how was it like being in front of Anne Robinson? I think she can come across as quite a powerful personality, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if we're putting it in a client context, you'll have been one of the tougher clients that I've ever had to come in front of. But you can see that it's he's putting on an act. But what they don't allow you to do is interact with her outside of the filming, because they don't want that sort of act to drop. But you see the little curl of the smile from the corner of her lip, or a little twinkle in her eye. So you know that she's playing an act, and everybody was having fun.
Awesome. And having breakfast with your mum, what was that all about?
So one of my absolute passions is politics. And I studied politics at uni. And when I say that, I'm not political, right? It's not that when I say I love politics, I affiliate with a party. I just find it academically fascinating. And whilst I was at uni, I majored, or one of my majors was US politics. And within that, I did US media and politics. I wrote my thesis about Fox News. And I also did a paper on Supreme Court, which I found fascinating. And when I finished uni, I could recite Supreme Court stats like justices or case law, like you could recite football statistics or cricket statistics, right? And so my mum said, when I finished uni, Sam, let's go away for a few days, anywhere in the world, you and I, just as like an end of uni trip. And I went, we're 100% going to Washington, DC. So we get to Washington, DC, and I read that you can do a tour of the Supreme Court. And I'm thinking here, well, it's going to be busy because I love the Supreme Court. So everybody must love the Supreme Court, which means they're going to be queuing down the street from I don't know what time in the morning. So I convinced my mum that we need to join what is going to be an incredibly long queue at 6 in the morning. The first tour is at 9:30. At 6 in the morning, the only people outside the Supreme Court was me, my mum, and a couple of policemen. Anyway, these policemen, after a while, come up and they ask, what's going on? And I get very excited. I explain to them. I think my mother's mixed between just pure embarrassment and sort of a little bit of pride that I'm her son. So the policemen go off. And then a few minutes later, out comes from the side of the Supreme Court building, a member of staff, says that the policeman had heard all about, why we were there. And, I was super passionate in the Supreme Court. Not to worry that, no one's going to come for the 9:30 tour before 9:29. But to pass the time, would we like to come into the staff canteen, have some breakfast, and they'll give us a little bit of a behind the scenes tour into the Supreme Court Museum. And for me, that was like being invited, I don't know, backstage at Wembley or something at the time. So in we went. had a lovely breakfast, and got taken around, to see some of the historical items in the Supreme Court, and it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Awesome. I think that's a very interesting story, and I think it's really an opportunity to see something behind the scenes. These places have they actually have such an intimidating view when you actually look at it from the front, and sometimes when you go behind the scenes, I think
Yeah.
the entire experience is a lot more different. So the overwhelming feeling which you get at some of these places, it actually goes away, and you see literally like the human side of some of these establishments as well.
100%. And sort of that story plays me a bit of, if something I was passionate about at the time, and I'm passionate about what I do now, and it really sticks with me that when you're really passionate about something and you push it, the opportunities that open up as a result are amazing. And therefore with work, I'm never afraid to hide my passion, right? I'll say to clients that we work with, look, we can obviously do this work for you, but this is the type of work that we love to do. It's the sort of thing that gets me up in the morning, and I'll work 20 hours a day on it without blinking. And sometimes in our industry, I think advisors are a little bit, cautious in showing emotion, but I'm very open. I will show my passion, and I'll be very, open with clients about how much, I care about the sector and I care about their businesses.
Awesome. I think that's amazing. I think showing passion in your line of work, yes, I agree that consultants and advisors, they generally keep a fairly poker face image. So I think it's amazing to see a consultant, an advisor who's actually going above that and showing his human side. Amazing. And with that, the last question of this section. So if there's one thing you could change about your life, what would that one thing be?
Look, I think my career has moved incredibly quickly, and I wish that maybe I'd taken a bit more perspective as I've gone through, right? As you move through your career sometimes, and you take that next step up, every breeze can feel like a hurricane, right, to start with. And I wish and hindsight's a wonderful thing, but taking more time just to enjoy the ride a little bit, step back a bit more. And always, in a world where I'm on a flight every week, I would love to spend more time with my daughters. Right. And there's always that trade-off, right? Clients want you in different parts of the world in real time, right? Your daughters want you to be at home. How do you manage balance with everything?
Absolutely. I think being able to take out time for ourselves in our busy lives and in our growing telecom hurdles, which keep coming in and keeping us busy, I think we really forget to live, and we just end up existing. But I think, Sam, you are managing to pursue so many of your passions. And I think that's one good thing which is keeping you alive and kicking, I'd say.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome. And with that, we come to the last question of today's conversation, Sam, which has been fantastic. But we're down to the last one. So our signature question: what does being human mean to you? What sort of a human being would you want the world to remember you as?
I think it would be someone who really cares, right? Really cares about the people that are around them. And again, I'm going to go back, if you allow me, Anurag, to another inflection point from someone in my career. It was a colleague of mine, a gentleman called Andy Nuttall, I worked with at GSMA. And he told me one night, he said, look, Sam, you've got to mentor someone so one day they can be your boss. And that line has really stuck with me. If I, in a professional context, can lift those around me, so one day, they can be my boss, or I can be a line in their autobiography where they've been incredibly successful, there's something I've done to help them, then that's good enough for me, right? I exist as a professional to help organizations. I want to be remembered as somebody who did their best, who cared, who lifted those up and built people that were around them. And then with that in time, also be remembered as someone who obviously really cared about his kids and was a great dad.
Amazing. Once again, Sam, that's such an amazing thought. And yes, I think our legacy lives through the people we interact with, and the value addition that we do into their lives, how we enrich their lives. I think in some shape or form, we don't realize maybe we just play one part of the larger ecosystem which every person around us interacts with. But I think we play our part. And if we do that well, especially for our kids, that's where we end up being a larger part of their ecosystem. So, as long as we are being able to bring meaningful impact and meaningful progress into people's lives, I think that's amazing. And I think, Sam, knowing all the passion that you reflected out here in today's conversation, I'm sure you're doing amazing at that.
I always try my best. I give 100% in everything I do.
Perfect, Sam. So, as I was mentioning, it's been a wonderful conversation. I'd love to keep it going, but I've learned so much about you, and I'm hoping there are many listeners out here who've interacted with you. I've seen so many C-level executives, so many people come up to you and have very deep, intensive conversations, both off stage and the panel discussions you do on stage. But I'm hoping some of them take out time and listen to this human side of Sam Evans, which is so interesting and fascinating. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you very much, Anurag. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sam. And to all our wonderful listeners here, thanks a lot for tuning into the show. We hope this episode gave you a good glimpse of the human side of Sam Evans, a consultant and an advisor by day, but passion-fueled powerhouse by heart. A proud South Londoner and a Crystal Palace loyalist. Someone who's a believer in the magic of human connection, always creating new doors instead of waiting for one to open. Someone who loves sweat and music, is a marathon runner, an ex-boxer, and definitely a future Ironman person as well. Let's watch out for that space. A former rock band member who's keeping the family jam sessions on through the piano and drums. And someone who's had fascinating experiences such as being on the weakest link and actually having breakfast at the US Supreme Court. That for us is Sam Evans. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, do stay tuned in because we shall soon be releasing yet another episode and another compelling story from the telecom space. And do follow the podcast on your preferred streaming channel. On behalf of Humans of Telecom, this is your host Anurag Aggarwal signing off for now. Take care.